This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment special teleconference for nurses, Nurses in the Halls of Power, the why, what, and how of nurse advocacy for safer chemicals. My name is Diana DeFazio, and on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. You can find more information on the websites akaction.org and healthandenvironment.org. Our call will last 1 hour with time for your questions and discussion towards the end. Everyone who signed up should have received an email this morning with a link to the call webpage where you will find the speaker's presentation. If you don't have the link in front of you, you can go to the Alaska Community Action on Toxics homepage at akaction.org. Simply click on the title of today's call, which you will find in the upper left on the homepage. Alaska Community Action on Toxics seeks ways to support the engagement of health professionals in environmental health issues and policy reform. And that's why we organized today's call. We hope that today's call provides you with advocacy tools that you can utilize to advance public health protections. And we are so pleased to be joined today by Katie Huffling of Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, Kathy Curtis of Clean and Healthy New York, and Pamela Miller of Alaska Community Action on Toxics. Our first two speakers will be co-presenting, and so I'd like to go ahead and introduce both Katie Huffling and Kathy Curtis at this time. And I'd also like to remind you that they do have a presentation. They'll be co-presenting off the same set of slides, and so please make sure to download those and have those ready so you can follow along. Katie Huffling is a certified nurse-midwife and the director of programs at the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. Ms. Huffling works with nurses and national nursing organizations on a variety of environmental health issues, including chemical policy, inclusion of environmental health into nursing education, and sustainable health care. She is the author of a number of peer-reviewed articles on environmental health issues as they relate to pregnancy and has developed an environmental health assessment tool used in a number of OB/GYN practices around the country that assesses for exposures in women. Ms. Huffling was a 2011 Reach the Decision Makers Fellow at the University of California, San Francisco Program on Reproductive Health and the Environment. And Kathy Curtis is Executive Director of Clean and Healthy New York, which promotes safer chemicals, a sustainable economy, and a healthier world. She has over 2 decades of experience in the environmental health movement and is a widely recognized national leader. She is on the steering committee of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments and coordinates ANHE's policy and advocacy work group. Kathy leads the Alliance for Toxic-Free Fire Safety, working to replace toxic chemical flame retardants with safer methods. She co-coordinates the Just Green Partnership, a coalition of 50 groups representing 1 million New Yorkers. Kathy also leads the Coming Clean Collaborative Policy Work Group, a forum on local, state, national, international, and market policy that protects people from toxic chemicals. So welcome, Katie and Kathy. We're so pleased that you could join us today, and you can go ahead and begin.
Great, thank you, Diana. This is Katie Huffling here, and Kathy and I are going to be going back and forth throughout this presentation, and we thought it would be fun for us and hopefully for you too. And so I hope from today's call that you'll be inspired to become more involved in the issue of safer chemicals. And this is whether it's a new area of interest for you or whether you're ready to take it to the next level if you've already become engaged. And I'm really thankful to Pam for organizing this call. Alaska is a really important state right now in our work for safer chemicals. And as you can see on the first slide there's lots of things that we're hoping that you can do to engage Senator Murkowski. She's supportive of chemical policy reform, but we want to make sure that she doesn't support an industry-backed bill that we don't believe will contain the public health protections that are needed. And all of the activities on this slide can be used to let Senator Murkowski know that nurses and other healthcare providers are interested in this issue and that she should support the correct bill. And today, Kathy and I will be giving you tools to make any and all of these things happen. And so you can go to the next slide. So why nurses? We are the most trusted profession, and we're experts at translating science for the public. We are also professional educators. That's a main part of our job, and we can use our skills to educate policymakers and the public on environmental health issues such as safer chemicals. Nurses fit perfectly within the 5 rights of political advocacy. We have a scientific background, we're skilled communicators, our message of health and science is very compelling, and it's difficult to say no to safeguards for public health. When nurses speak about the children that they're seeing in the hospital that have asthma, they can't breathe, it's really hard to say no to these messages that they're bringing. And also, we're not afraid to keep asking for the public health protections that are needed. Next slide. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about our organization, the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. And we're a coalition of nursing organizations and individual nurses who believe that environmental health is an integral part of nursing practice. As Diana was saying, we've worked on a number of initiatives on the inclusion of environmental health, whether it's in nursing education, nursing practice, and other initiatives such as chemical policy reform. And we're here as a resource for you. So if you do become engaged on this issue, we've got tons of resources on our website. We also do monthly work group calls, and our policy and advocacy work group has done a tremendous amount of work on safer chemicals, and we'd love to have you join us and become involved with our work and get to network with nurses from around the country that are interested and passionate on this issue. On the next slide, it shows some of the different organizations that are working on this, both state-based and nationally. And all of us are part of a larger coalition working on safer chemicals. And as a coalition, we recognize that by working together, our sum is greater than our parts. We have state-based organizations such as the Alaska Community Action on Toxics and Clean and Healthy New York, who are working on state chemical legislation. And we hope that this will then drive federal regulation as well. The Safer States Coalition is comprised of organizations that are working on these state-based initiatives. And then the Safer Chemicals Healthy Families Coalition is working on federal legislation. We'll be telling you about some of these state initiatives and some of the federal legislation in just a few minutes. Kathy?
Okay, so hi everybody, and thank you so much for having us today. I just wanted to give an overview of what is meant when people use the words environmental health and link those two concepts together. And first of all, I'd like to tell you what it's not. As everyone knows, there are many factors that determine disease, such as social and cultural factors, diet, genetics, stress, a number of factors that aren't related to toxic chemical exposure. When you add them all together is, what dictates sort of the role that chemicals play. They all leverage one another and create, synergies and are additive. So environmental health is targeted towards disease prevention, and we view the various policies that we work on, whether it's in our healthcare setting or legislatively, as disease prevention laws. And it works to address and assess, figure out what the factors are that could affect health, and then control them or minimize them or eliminate them entirely. So next slide. The problem, how did we get here where there's 90%, of the toxic chemicals that are in commerce right now are in products? People tend to think of toxic chemicals as what comes out of a smokestack or out of a pipe into the river or gets trucked away and then ends up in hazardous waste landfills. Those are the kind of releases that are actually legal. They're permitted. A company applies for a permit and says, we're going to dump this much waste per year, and here's how we're going to release it. And the government says, well, okay, make sure that you stay within those parameters and you report to us. And that is what constitutes the toxic release inventory, which is data that companies provide to the government that describe their releases into air, water, and soil. However, the vast majority of the chemicals that leave a facility do so not into the air, water, and soil, but in the products that we use every day, whether it's brake cleaner, perm solution, household cleaners, electronics, you name it. And these toxic chemicals are largely unregulated, and it's really hard to find out about where they are in products. They don't have to tell us. They're not on the labels. It's hard. Next slide. Right now, there are 80,000 plus chemicals in commerce. And the vast majority of them, about 3/4 of them, were just grandfathered in and assumed safe in 1976 when the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is the federal law that governs and regulates chemicals in this country, were passed. All of the chemicals, in other words, that already existed were assumed to be perfectly fine. Since then, the Environmental Protection Agency has only been able to gather adequate safety data on about 200 of those chemicals. And only 5 chemicals or chemical classes have been partially banned under the Toxic Substances Control Act. And only 1 chemical class was fully banned because the chemical was named in the law. And those are PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. No chemicals have been banned for over 20 years through the Toxic Substances Control Act. What happened was the EPA tried to ban asbestos. They had scores and scores of studies proving that asbestos was harmful, and it did not. The asbestos company sued the government when they instituted that ban. And the law is written so poorly, and the burden of proof is so high that the courts ruled that the EPA did not meet the threshold of proof that asbestos is harmful, and therefore it was allowed to continue in commerce, and the EPA basically gave up over 20 years ago on banning hazardous chemicals. Next slide. And back to Katie.
All right. Let's see. I think it's really important to highlight how our current chemical safety threshold of when they're put on the market. And I think it's nice to compare it to medication approval process. You can see it really highlights the inadequacies. So I'm a nurse midwife, and I take comfort in the fact that, the medications that I prescribe to my patients, I know that they have to go through extremely rigorous testing prior to be putting on the market. I know that it's not a perfect system, but they do have to meet certain levels of safety and effectiveness, or they're just not going to be put on the market. The manufacturers also have to look at things like how these medications interact with other food or medications. And then once it is on the market, they monitor that medication to make sure that there aren't unexpected side effects. And then it's pulled off the market if there are, and we've seen many cases of that. Conversely, when you look at the many chemicals that all of us are exposed to every day, it's a totally different world. Manufacturers aren't required to test their chemicals for safety at all before they're put on the market. If it is tested, then cumulative exposures aren't taken into account. I mean, there's so many chemicals where you could get that from a variety of sources, from the air, food, water, from the cosmetics that you're using. And nor do they look at how that chemical may interact with other chemicals that we're exposed to. For example, if a substance has negative neurological effects and you're exposed to another chemical that also impacts the neurological system, because they aren't looking at both of those, we don't know how they may act synergistically together. If you're exposed to both of those chemicals, could the effects be multiplied? And so now, hopefully, we have a bill in Congress that will pass that's looking to address some of these shortcomings in our chemical safety system. And Kathy?
Thank you. I think we've detailed to some degree how much of a failed chemical management system we are currently operating under. And I just thought I'd tell you a little bit more about this failed law, the Toxic Substances Control Act. and what's coming to the forefront, what's being more and more broadly acknowledged that it doesn't work. We need to upgrade this law. It's one of the few laws that have passed, big federal environmental laws that have never been updated since it was passed in 1976. Unlike the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and other major pieces of environmental legislation. So the EPA is the implementing agency, but it was not given the authority to really regulate chemicals effectively in the law. There's an enormous burden of proof of harm from chemicals in order for the EPA to be able to act on them. There's multi-million-dollar testing requirements for EPA for each chemical, which is why we only have adequate data on about 200. And there's information about chemicals is protected under trade secrets. So confidential business information is able to be, proprietary information on chemicals is able to be withheld by the chemical makers themselves, even from the government, let alone from product makers or retailers or other consumers like you and I. So the reform efforts began in 2004 when Senator Frank Lautenberg introduced the Kid Safe Chemicals Act, and that's been reintroduced each year up to and including 2012. It has not yet been introduced again in 2013, although we anticipate that its reintroduction. And there is no House match right now. As folks know, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republican Party right now, and they are philosophically opposed to any increased regulations, not that they're specific to chemical policy, but they believe that there are already too many regulations in law and that they should be reduced. So it is just a one-house bill at this point. Next slide. Now, there's pretty broad, as I said, agreement that the Toxic Chemical Substances Control Act should be upgraded and modernized and strengthened. The difference comes in our view, the health professionals and sustainable businesses, labor unions, teachers, nurses, advocates for environmental health, interpretation of what TSCA reform looks like and what the chemical industry and a number of trade associations believe TSCA reform should look like. They would like to maintain certain principles that are currently the case, which is no pre-market testing. Any chemical should be able to be released on the market without having to provide adequate safety data. Sort of a shoot first, ask questions later approach. They say that having to test chemicals before they're released on the market would stifle innovation, is their argument for that. They wish to protect confidential business information or their trade secrets, where they submit information to the government, and sometimes there's so many blackouts throughout the whole report that sometimes they even black out the name of the chemical itself. So they argue that, hey, we paid $1 million to create this chemical and we shouldn't have to share that information with our competitors. However, that doesn't enable anyone, health professionals, consumers, anybody, to get that information. So therein lies the problem. They also don't want states to pass stronger laws than whatever legislation eventually passes in the federal government. They want to create a ceiling by passing federal reform, not a floor that states can then take action to more comprehensively protect their own residents. We obviously, want, first of all, immediate action to be taken on the worst chemicals. There are chemicals about which the EPA has adequate safety data, hundreds. They could take action immediately on the worst of the worst chemicals, ones that accumulate in our body, build up in the environment, and are toxic, for example. Ones that are known to cause cancer, genetic changes, mutagenicity, and reproductive harm, for example. Instead of the EPA being responsible for producing this information, the chemical makers who already have the information to a significant degree should be responsible and bear the cost of producing the information. Right now, the chemical industry sort of externalizes their costs in terms of healthcare expenses and environmental damage, natural resource losses, to all of the other sectors of the economy, and they should be responsible. And then the cost of their doing business would be more accurately reflected. We also want the best science to be used. There's a lot of argument about junk science and sound science, and we would like the National Academy of Science to be the standard by which decisions are made to regulate chemicals. So, next slide. And a lot of those principles and policy platforms, planks in the platform, are captured by the Safe Chemicals Act of 2011, which, because there was a 2-year Congress, was also the same in 2012. And this gives EPA the authority they actually need to effectively identify and restrict chemicals. And it also requires safety information before chemicals enter the market. It reduces exposures on the most vulnerable communities, low-income communities, communities of color, other communities that are disproportionately exposed or impacted by toxic chemicals. It strengthens the science needs to evaluate chemicals, so it uses the practices called for by the NAS. And it gives the EPA not only the authority, but the resources necessary to effectively address those concerns. So it's pretty much got, the solutions that we're seeking in the language of the law. Next slide. So basically, there's this state-based approach where states have passed laws that bubble up and create this annoying patchwork quilt where the chemical industry themselves is like, oh my God, there's 12 different states that have passed 12 different, slightly different BPA regulations or PBDE regulations or mercury or lead or phthalates, all the chemicals that we hear about that are making headlines. And, it's very difficult to comply a little bit differently with each of them. And also, as many policies have bubbled up from states in the past, the states are a laboratory for policy elements. It gives a sort of a practice run or pilot projects for how to regulate chemicals that occur on a state level that inform what the federal policy should be. And, the fact that other countries have better chemical policies than we do sort of and the fact the chemical industry is still doing business in those countries and in those markets and thriving indicates that it's doable. And if we don't have them and other countries do, it creates a competitive disadvantage for us. And market pressure has been extremely effective, and where people will say, well, we're going to test these products and let the world know that there's a cancer-causing chemical in your nursing pillow or in your couch or in your lipstick. And the companies are much more easy to respond to that. They can respond much more rapidly to change how they manufacture a product or what materials they source often than the government itself. So the market pressure is what contributes to and advancement of policy. And it enables companies to favorably differentiate themselves from other companies, thereby giving them a benefit, a sort of a reward in the marketplace. And it's also what people see first. Not too many policy wonks out there are really tracking the inner workings of legislation. I'm sure everyone's heard the saying, there are two things you don't want to watch being made, sausage and legislation. And so market changes are much more visible to the public. When you're seeing labels on products all of a sudden that say BPA free or PBDE free or does not contain lead, that's when that's has a much higher profile. Next slide. And so there is a state-based approach that, depending on where states are with their political climate and what they're able to achieve, a whole host of states have achieved single chemical restrictions on specific chemicals in specific product sectors, like lead in jewelry or BPA in baby bottles or DECA in furniture or electronics. And then some states are pursuing chemical classes at a time, like the 3 tris chemicals or the 3 PBDs, 4 groups of phthalates out of whatever, nail polish or crib mattresses or, different product sectors. And then there's things that go after all chemicals in those product sectors like electronic take-back or electronic waste recycling or regulating all cosmetics or all household cleaning product ingredient disclosure laws, for example, or procurement policies that regulate what kind of cleaners are used in state buildings or schools is another one. And then there's this broad infrastructure style reform, which is really what's necessary, because what we're seeing with single chemical restrictions or even chemical class restrictions is that product makers will just switch to the next thing down on the periodic table, which can have equally or similar hazard components to it, and have similar structurally similar and similar health impacts as well. But yet is perfectly legal. In other words, you ban one chemical like lead in jewelry, and then they replace it with cadmium, which is equally harmful and yet has no regulation against it. So in order to avoid that, we've been seeing more and more infrastructure bills, comprehensive bills introduced, and many states have passed them as well. And, that policy would include the creation of a high hazard list of chemicals that may contain over 1,000 chemicals, about which we know enough to know that they're hazardous, and then a smaller list of chemicals are prioritized based on us knowing where they're used in products and what the likelihood pathways of exposure are for humans. And then we could require disclosure of the use of those priority chemicals in products. Many companies will want to avoid having to disclose, we put, chlorinated tris in your nursing pillow. And so they would have a date certain by which they would need to get out of using that chemical in order to avoid having to disclose its use. And then there would be a longer period in which an alternative assessment could occur, and the government could require safer solutions when it's been demonstrated that they are available and affordable and effective. Next slide. The international efforts that are playing in are the European Union's REACH legislation, which stands for the Registration, Evaluation, and Authorization of Chemicals. And this is a flipping of the burden of proof in the European Union, by which chemicals must be proven safe before they're allowed to be used, and rather than innocent until proven guilty, which is the approach right now in the United States. The EU Restriction of Hazardous Substances legislation works with electronics, and so there are chemicals that are banned from being used in electronics because of their high hazard nature. There's the Stockholm Convention, which is also known as the Treaty on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which originally banned 12 chemicals. This is a global ban that over 160 countries have signed on to. Unfortunately, the United States is not one of them. That banned 12 chemicals and then is able to add to that list of the original chemicals they called the Dirty Dozen. And there are other countries that are acting on specific chemicals of concern far in advance of the U.S. That also sort of drives the global market, shows doability, and just makes us be sort of global second-class citizens that end up being a dumping ground for a lot of the chemicals and products that have been banned for use elsewhere. And what we often see is a link to universal health care. Like in the EU, they have universal health care, and the government is tired of paying for diseases and disorders of environmental origin and giving the chemical industry a free pass, as causers of associations with those. Somebody's making a loud noise. Could you put yourself on mute, whoever's? Thanks. Can we go to the next slide? And the market shifts piece of this is certainly driven enormously by consumer demand. I think that people, especially parents, are just on such high, like DEFCON 4 concern about toxic chemicals in products because of all of the toy recalls and the work that we've been doing to test products and release reports broadly. And so a lot of the consumer demand has driven safer products. And that continues. And it's been shown that people are even willing to pay more for these products. And even in the most recent economic downturn, the companies that were promoting their safe and healthy and green product lines were still experiencing double-digit growth when other companies were, pretty much going out of business or, having to lay people off, et cetera. And what we've seen is some retail regulation, which the chemical industry just absolutely hates, where a company like Walmart will say, you know what, I know that DECA has not been phased out, but we don't want it anymore. So please let us know, vendors, whether or not this chemical is in any of your products, and if so, we're going to not source, we're not going to use you as a source of products that end up on our shelves. So they can act as mini governments, and Walmart in particular, but other these major big box retailers like Safeway and Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, they really have an enormous procurement power. It's one thing if little old me says, well, I'm not going to buy your toothpaste because it has sodium lauryl sulfate in it. And it's quite another when Walmart says it. So that can have enormous impacts where the sort of slow government can follow. Next slide. And it's back to Kate.
Thanks, Kathy. So we recognize that political action really should be, excuse me, an extension of our nursing practice. It's caring for our environment in our communities. It's just another form of the caring that we give our patients. Through our political advocacy, we can show how much we care for healthier patients, communities, and our workplaces. And I think by becoming active on these environmental health issues, it addresses one of the core of nursing care, and that is prevention of disease and to improve human health. And so I think this fits very nicely into our nursing practice. Next slide. I think some of us where you can get your information, how you're connecting with other people that are engaged on these issues can be a bit overwhelming. I've taken just a couple of examples, I think, of the bigger, more effective things and resources that you can be using. I'm just going to talk for a couple minutes about Twitter and Facebook, because I think those are things that we can be a good starting point if you're just getting engaged in this issue. Both to get more information on it, but then also to engage with other nurses and other people that are engaged on this issue and can give you a big bang for your buck. Next slide. So as you can see, there's a couple people on Twitter, just a few users. Because of these millions of people and millions of tweets each day, it can be a really great way to get the word out about a cause that you believe in. And it can also be a great way to stay up to date on the latest and greatest that's coming out on whatever that issue is. By following people that are interested in the same subjects that you are, you can find out who they're following and expand your realm of knowledge that way. And one thing that our coalition has found is that if a celebrity retweets something that you've posted, all of a sudden the Twitterverse just lights up. Millions of people are seeing that tweet, and it can be a really effective way of getting your message out. Next slide. I know there's probably most of you are on Twitter, but if there's some of you like me who was kind of dragged kicking and screaming into using Twitter, these are just some things that I found helpful, because you go in there and you're like, what are these hashtags and that @ sign? Like it's kind of confusing. So the hashtags allow those words after that hashtag to be searchable. So if somebody searches for nurses, any tweet that has that hashtag nurse with nurses after it will come up when they're searching. So if you're going to have a tweet that has content that's applicable to nurses, making sure you put that hashtag in, or safer chemicals, can make it so that your tweet is going to come up when people are searching that. Also, the @ is then the username for that person. And this can be a great way to put pressure on a policymaker. If you have enough people that are writing on, at Lisa Murkowski about safe chemicals, you can be sure that her staff and she are going to start listening to that because they're going to see that people are interested in this issue, that it's important to them, and it's also out in the public. Next slide. And so there's ways that you can get your message across most effectively with tweets. If you can include 1 to 3 hashtags, and then also making sure that you're including that influential person in that tweet so that it makes sure that it's on their radar. And then not going to the full 140 characters so that others can then easily retweet your tweets, so that it can spread out through all these different networks. Next slide. In Facebook, probably all of you are on Facebook. That's another tool that you can utilize. And if you're an Alaskan nurse, you could create your own Facebook page for safe chemicals, where you could start posting things that are of importance to you. And that can be an excellent way to build interest in that topic, first through your friends, and then it can spread out from there. Next slide. And I think that it, for me anyways, I think it can be a little more compelling than Twitter. I think being the way that you can post content, photos, and the comments that people make can be a little bit more engaging than Twitter. On our Facebook page, we found that if we post 2 to 3 times a day and having either fun photos or really making sure that the quotes that we're putting in are really engaging, then it starts to build the people that are liking our site, and then also building that supporter list. And on the next slide, I have an example of a nurse that's created her own page, and she's only had this up for about, I guess, 6 or 8 months, and now she has over 1,300 people that are following her. She's in New York. She's a nurse that's working on fracking in New York, and she just posts a few things every day on fracking. And she's really getting the message out and engaging nurses around the country on this issue. It's been really successful. And next slide. If you have a story that you'd like to tell, if you're seeing something in your practice that you'd like to write about, a blog can be an excellent way to get that information out. We have a blog on our website. A lot of the advocacy organizations do, and you can just ask us or ask them if you could do a guest blog. And if it's a personal story, that really will resonate with the readers. I find that the ones where it's more technical information don't seem to get as many comments or have the number of readers. But if you can, have a really great introductory paragraph, a great personal story, then that's the perfect place for it. And it doesn't have to be too long. You don't want to write, pages. You want it to be a short, interesting story. And again, we'd love, if you have stories that you'd like to get out, we'd love to help you with that. Kathy?
Okay. So as up and coming as all of those social media venues are, there are some people who still like to just actually hold a newspaper in their hand And there are a number of ways that you can get in print in those big daily newspapers. And these are just some tips for folks that we don't need to go into a great deal of detail about, because you'll have access to this PowerPoint as time goes on from this day forward. But really, there are some questions you should ask yourself before you put a lot of time and effort into generating press from the traditional media. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to get what they need. In other words, they need to generate content every day. And it helps if something shocking, or there's sex involved, or something that makes it timely, relevant, and interesting. And you have to be able to sort of drop everything when a story comes out, and leverage opportunities. For example, it was Super Bowl Sunday last Sunday, and it would have been easy to, for example, submit a story about the couch study, because everybody's sitting around on their couch being couch potatoes and watching the game. So something that enables you to seize a Mother's Day theme, or any Halloween. Do a little report about medals in face makeup for children, that kind of thing. Seizing opportunities like that. But you should also have sort of a communications plan that goes out for the whole year, that that takes that long view. So you want to be agile, but you also want to have plans. And really, it's about building relationships and contacts at these papers and through these media outlets, so that they take your calls, they're receptive to what you have to say. And it's not going to happen overnight, so you got to be patient and persistent. Next slide. So holding a press conference is, you don't always need to do that in order to get a story, but it is a way to get multiple stories in multiple different media. Like you could get the print media, also radio interviews and stories, so the broadcast media, and also the television media. And the way to get TV is to have interesting visuals. Like we've used in gigantic blow-up baby bottles, gigantic blow-up rubber duckies, or moms pushing strollers. A bunch of medical professionals dressed in their scrubs would certainly be an interesting visual. And having high-level experts or officials also is an attraction. It's good to have an accessible location with electricity. The reporters are not going to go out of their way. They're not going to climb a mountain to attend a press event. The best days are Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, because then you're in the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday papers. People generally don't read the paper as much on Friday, Saturday. The best times before noon. They have very real deadlines by which they need to spit out their content. So it's better to get to them earlier in the day. And the best way to promote your event is through a media advisory, which gives them enough information to give them that they need to decide whether or not they should come, but not enough to where they don't need to come, because they've already got the full story right there in the advisory. So next slide. So this is a bare bones, spit out info about who, what, when, where, and why. And the more advance notice you can give them to start building your story, the better. So a week in advance is ideal. Not everyone can do that for sure. Even 24 to 48 hours in advance is better than not doing it at all, not giving them the heads up. And then this is very important. It's the stage that people often leave behind, is to make the follow-up calls either the day before. So, hey, you come in, it's going to be great. Oh, gee, we didn't say in the advisory, but since then, this other person is going to come and speak, or something that sort of pitches it to them in the morning of, for TV and radio. They have editorial meetings first thing in the morning and decide, based on all of the advisories they've received, which stories they're going to cover. And so it just helps to put you back on the top of the pile if you call and say, hey, you coming? So, and if not, then you can say, well, look, why don't I call you a little later and we can do a little side story, or I can come to the studio and do a side story. So it will help you plan, know how many reporters are going to attend, and also help you pick up a couple stories if they are interested, but it just didn't rise to the threshold. And it's good to have kits for the press when they get there that they can take away with them, so that you can make sure they get the story straight and they don't misquote you or otherwise miss certain salient points you wish them to make. And
Kathy, this
visuals.
is Diana. I'm sorry to interject. I just want to give you all about a 5-minute.
Okay.
On time.
Okay. Next slide.
Okay. Sorry to do that.
So this also gives you a little bit of a reverse timeline and a checklist of what to bring, what to do, and what to have for your press conference. Okay. And as I said, folks will be able to access this later. Editorial board meetings, next slide, actually get the paper itself to take a position. And since they're perceived as sort of unbiased, obviously you have a passion and an agenda, they are not supposed to. So if you can get them to actually take a position on the issue, that's extremely powerful. So this sort of lays out how to conduct an ed board meeting. And then you can follow that. You can get multiple hits. So, example, you get the news story. Then you can get the paper to take the position on the story, and then you can have someone submit an op-ed. Oops, I'm sorry, Katie. I'm stepping on your toes here. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay, Kathy. Right. So you can keep that going with the next slide. Putting in the op-ed, which we have successfully done. Which is fabulous. Op-eds are also a great opportunity if you have a new study that's coming out, or with the Safe Chemicals Act, as that bill was being introduced. It's a way to keep that story alive. Most of the time it's between a 700 and 800 word count. And I think having the health perspective is an interesting angle for environmental issues, because they're used to hearing from environmentalists, not health professionals. And if you go to the next slide, you can see this is an example of an op-ed that we helped get into the Detroit Free Press right before a big event that we had in support of the Safe Chemicals Act in May. Or actually, I'm sorry, it was published right after the event. So it kept the pressure going in support of that. So this is another tool. Next slide. Also, along with these other newspaper tools, you can do letters to the editor. These are a little bit easier to get in. They're usually about 200 words. And I've had great success, again, with nurses, talking about short personal experience, why it's important for health. And we're happy to help you. If you have an interest in doing any of these things, we're happy to help you get these in the paper. Kathy?
And then finally, the last tactic that works really well to influence policymakers is to meet with them in person. They meet with lobbyists all the time, and they very seldom hear from their constituencies, the people who live in their districts, or health professionals in particular. So it's like, wow, I didn't know you could make it all the way to my office. It really sticks out in their minds when a nurse comes to visit them. And both in their district offices and in, of course, Washington, D.C., they're even more surprised to see you. And then, you offer to continue to be a resource to them. You anticipate in advance what they might have concerns about, or what might make them oppose your argument, and be prepared for that. And, again, preparation is key. And as Katie said, we're more than happy to help anyone who wants to conduct such a meeting and, bring our expertise to bear. And it's always important to try and meet with the policymaker in person. They're always going to try. Their job is to deflect you from their member. Their member is busy, important, and their job is to keep you happy but deflect you. So your job, of course, is to get to meet with the actual policymaker themselves. And don't bury them in paper. Make sure that your information is concise and compelling. Policymakers tend to only be able to hold in their heads the last thing they heard. So you want to make it really penetrate so it has some staying power. And invite people in advance to accompany you. Be brief, concise. Make sure when you walk out that everyone's clear about what the follow-up points are and what outcome everyone heard and what the next steps are. Otherwise, it was just a fun thing, but you kind of wasted your time. So just to tie it all together, I know we started out saying, hey, you can contact Senator Murkowski and have these impacts. And I'm sure folks were like, wow, I've never done any of that stuff before. I'm not sure I could do it. But we're here to help. And each of these activities leverage the others, and some of them are actually quite easy. You can start slow and just build your way up. But you would be amazed at what an enormous impact. I think a lot of people don't do anything because they don't think it really makes a difference, and it really, really does, even in this day and age. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Did Katie have any concluding remarks?
I do. Just one last thing. Any nurses or anyone else on the call that would like to give Senator Murkowski a call, email me. I've got really quick talking points. You can call her office and just tell her, that you want her to support the Safe Chemicals Act, that we heard that there's a bad bill that could be coming out, and that you don't want her to support that, and it will take all of 2 minutes of your time. So we'd love to have you calling into her, and the sooner the better.
Great. Thank you, Kathy and Katie, so much for preparing this special presentation for Alaska nurses and for making yourselves so available to support the efforts that might come out of this call. We really appreciate it. And in the time remaining, we will still have some time, I hope, for some discussion at the end. But before that, I'd like to invite Pamela Miller, Founder and Executive Director of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, to give us an update on Alaska policy. And Pam is known for her work to prompt state, national, and international chemicals policy reform to protect environmental and human health in the Arctic. She's a leader in Coming Clean, a national network of groups concerned about chemicals policy reform, serves as a state policy expert for safer chemicals, healthy families, and has been instrumental in prompting the ban of toxic chemicals worldwide. Pam was also selected as a fellow for the 2011 Reach the Decision Makers program at the University of California, San Francisco program on reproductive health and the environment. And finally, she also serves as principal investigator for community-based research projects in the Arctic, which are supported by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Diana, and greetings all. And first of all, I'd also like to thank Katie and Kathy. What dynamic, incredible leaders you've both been for environmental health and justice, and it's just an honor to work with you. So I'm going to give a very brief update on state policy and work we're doing also on federal policy. During the 2012 legislature, we supported a bill that would phase out the use of polybrominated diphenyl ethers in electronics and furniture, flame retardant chemicals. And this bill, we were very happy, passed the full Alaska State Senate. And it was sponsored by our state senator, Bill Wielechowski, called the Safer Homes and Healthy Families Bill. However, largely as a result of lobbying by a chemical industry front group called Citizens for Fire Safety, the bill got stalled in the state house and then didn't pass in 2012. And a great expose came out about all of this chemical industry influence on state legislatures just after our session closed in April of last year. So unfortunately, it didn't pass the House. So what are our plans for 2013 and going forward? The session is currently underway. We don't have any bills currently yet introduced, although we're working on that very hard. As you probably know, if you live in Alaska, the makeup of our legislature is quite different this year, yet we are optimistic. So we are promoting a chemicals listing bill that would list hazardous chemicals in products that are particularly of concern to children's health. We are also trying to get a resolution introduced that would pass the state legislature that would support passage of the federal Safe Chemicals Act. And I'd be glad to provide more information. I won't go into any great detail about that. But as Kathy mentioned, the states are really laboratories for chemicals policy, and we're very committed to working on that, even though we have a very challenging legislature. And some 26 states are considering chemicals policies this year concerning chemicals policy. So we're in good company, and we want to promote that and are definitely committed to that. The Safe Chemicals Act is very important. Both Katie and Kathy highlighted that. Our senators, Senator Mark Begich and Senator Lisa Murkowski, are very key to this. Senator Begich, we were very happy, was a co-sponsor of the Safe Chemicals Act in 2012, but he needs to formally support the new bill that we anticipate will be introduced again by Senator Lautenberg in 2013. And also, we want to urge everyone to contact both senators, but especially Senator Lisa Murkowski, because she will be really key to this. We need bipartisan support, and we think that she is very concerned about the public health implications of the Safe Chemicals Act, especially as it affects people in Alaska. So we need your support. We're really happy that you joined this call. We want to urge you to contact us to become more engaged. Also, the last Collaborative on Health and the Environment call we had focused on coal and health impacts. We have a lot of issues going on now around proposed mining, coal development activities, so we very much would like to engage nurses in that effort as well. And that last J call is posted on our website. So we just want to invite everyone to contact us and work with us. We're really happy to have this call, and thanks again to Katie and Kathy.
Thank you, Pam. Again, I'd like to thank our speakers and all of you for joining us today. We will now open the lines for discussion, and since we are running out of time, we'd like to give Alaska-based nurses the first opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. So if you would like to do so, please press *2 to unmute your line, and please also state your name and affiliation. Thank you. Again, *2 to unmute if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. Sounds like someone may be just unmuted. You can go ahead.
That was me in Ottawa, Canada.
Oh, very good. This is Susan Walsh, board president of the Alaska Nurses Association, and I just wanted to thank everybody for their interest in this. And I will make a commitment personally. I can't act as the for the entire board, but personally, I will make a commitment to get the information distributed statewide somehow.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you, Susan.
Yes.
And Pamela,
anything that we can do to help facilitate that, we are happy to do it.
Yeah, our contact information is on the last slide. So, and, you know, we would love to hear from any and all of you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, I think Alaska has an advantage of being small as far as having access to our representatives also. So.
And the participant from Ottawa?
Yes, my name is Irene.
Like to ask the question. Mm-hmm.
My name is Irene Reiki-Kaunuk. I graduated from Queens with a degree in biochemistry and from McGill with a Master of Science in Nursing. And I'm looking to my doctorate in Doctor of Nursing practice at Wilkes, where they have environmental health. But I am sitting on a very big story. I don't know what to do with it, and I need help. My daughter died, who was an Aboriginal Ottawa University Studies Theatre. She died of complications from mercury poisoning in 2011. I'm sitting on a very big story. I haven't made public. 2020 has expressed some interest, but I don't want to get my nursing license in trouble in Canada here for talking about this. The hospital where she was pronounced dead and where I worked, right after she died, they reported me to their own College of Nurses for being mentally ill. And this was thrown out by the College of Nurses, but I never got my job back or an apology or any money. They offered me money to not to talk. And I don't know what to do with this story. We have a website. It's www.puijuq.com. There was a coal sludge spill in the States, a large spill in 2008. That's when my children, I found out they had mercury poisoning. Zakara, who died, her level was 54, and Paul's level 2 months after I found out when we stopped eating anything from the sea, his levels was 33. My friend with dementia, his levels was 64. And according to the literature I read, you start dying when the levels are 94. But this was all denied that this was any sort of problem. And then later in 2008, I read much later in a paper, because I was doing an interest search, that a teacher in the Maritimes in Canada, she died also of mercury poisoning. The police thought it was a murder, but I think she might have just liked seafood. And then in 2009, another relative of ours from Igloolik, Nunavut, who would have survived exclusively off of sea mammals like seal, walrus, she developed strange symptoms, multi-organ system failure, and was medevaced to Ottawa and died here in the ICU on a night when I was working. And I told them to test her for her body for mercury and lead and stuff, what was found in my daughter. And they did not. I wasn't listened to at all. And who else died? Zakara, my daughter, died. And my other son, Paul, who's sitting right here, he has documented on psychological testing, he has brain damage, pervasive developmental disorder, and Asperger's. He wasn't like that when he was 5. It was from the accumulation of mercury and lead in his body from eating our diet, our traditional diet, which is like seal, walrus, char, all kinds of stuff like that. My other son, who still lives in Igloolik, has brain damage, never finished his high school, and he also has supraventricular tachycardia, runs of this, and also high blood pressure, which I know is caused by the mercury. However, up there they said it's idiopathic, and they have no diagnosis and no treatment. And I know with this runs of cardiac arrhythmia that's caused from the mercury levels, that can be fatal because you get an R-on-T phenomenon. I work in the hospitals in Ottawa, in Ottawa and surrounding areas now in acute care, but I'm looking to specialize in environmental health. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and under the link section on my website, that's where I post stuff like this. If I can get these slides, I'm going to put them up on my website, and we sell the children's copies of Zakara's artwork to raise money for like stuff like Environmental Health Association of Ontario, Environmental Defence Fund, and also to support Canada's Arctic Children's and Youth Foundation.
Irene,
yeah.
Thank you. And clearly you have a very important story, and I'm wondering if maybe you can do some follow-up with Kathy and Katie.
Yeah, I'll be I have your email up on the screen now, and I'm going to email you guys and see what we can do with this. The children's doctor said to write a book, and I can't wait ever because some of this is time sensitive. And while we speak, Inuit up in the Arctic, they're still dying.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. This is Sherry Norris from the California Indian Environmental Alliance. Are you there? This is related to this. We work on the Global Mercury Treaty. I know Pam at ACAT was working on it with us previously. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
I hear you.
Yes.
So Irene, I know that there are, related to the Global Mercury Treaty, there are a couple different organizations that are trying to build stories where people were impacted by mercury, specifically in different regions. Yeah. And so we work in California, but this is the type of story that they would be interested in including, and it would be able to be seen globally through their programs. And the organization is IPEN, and I can, I couldn't get on your website. I tried, but if there's a way for us to be in touch, I can try to help you.
It's PIUJUQ. If you Google that, it should come up close to the top. It's Puyuk Inuit Art Studios.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm
not getting it. CUIJUQ.
PIU. PIUJUQ. It's the word in Inuktitut for it. It is beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to make sure.
Just try that now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you get something?
Yes, got you. Okay, I'll find you.
Okay, Sherry and Irene, you're connected now. Good.
That beautiful girl is the one who died. If you go under the artist.
Yeah, got you.
Okay. Okay. I'm not on there because I have to hide. Because I've been reported to the College of Nurses for being crazy for talking about mercury in the environment.
Yeah,
the Ottawa Hospital did that.
I'll just say that California Indian Environmental Alliance offers continuing medical education for doctors and nurses on mercury in the human body, and we're looking for creating links on how that this information can be in medical school because we can't reach everyone, and also revision of intake materials at hospitals and clinics because of being so crazy. You know.
The biggest hospital here in Ottawa where I worked, Ottawa, in the Ottawa area, they don't acknowledge that environmental toxicity that exists at all. The Environmental Health Association of Ontario took our family to the Ministry of Health. Here, that's the Ministry of Health after Zakara died, and they didn't listen at all.
Irene,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
going to go off now and let you guys all get back on the
short, but I did want to invite Pam Miller to make any concluding remarks about advocacy in Alaska and in relation to what Susan Walsh offered. And then I'd like to announce 2 upcoming calls after that.
Great. Thank you, Diana. And thanks, everyone. And also, Irene, we're happy to lend whatever support and information we can to your very important issues and concerns there. And I just want to say again, very briefly, because we're past the top of the hour, please do contact us. And we work closely with Kathy and Katie as well. We would really like to engage people on state-level chemicals policy. We think it's vital to protect the health of children and everyone here in Alaska while we work to pass the Safe Chemicals Act. And we do know that Senators Begich and Murkowski are getting a lot of pressure from the chemical industry in the form of the American Chemistry Council. So it's important for them to hear the voices of nurses and others who live in Alaska, why this federal law is so important to protect the health of people in Alaska. So I'll stop there, but please do contact us. We'd be very, very glad to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. And I'm sorry that we have gone over today. We usually do try to end at the top of the hour. But just real quickly, I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of this call will be available on our website, and we'll send you the link to the podcast when it is posted. And also, we have 2 great Che Alaska calls coming up. Our next call is 1 week from today on February 13th. Our featured presenter is Dr. Heather Stapleton of Duke University. She's lead author of a new peer-reviewed study that tested couches across the United States for flame-retardant chemicals and found that the vast majority contained potentially toxic or untested flame-retardant chemicals. And on March 6th, we have a call on environmental exposures and autism with Dr. Martha Herbert, who is an assistant professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School and a pediatric neurologist at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Our other speaker for that call will be Maureen Swanson, National Coordinator of the Healthy Children Project of the Learning Disabilities Association of America. And you'll be receiving announcements with the sign-up form for both of these calls. So please feel free to contact us if you have additional questions or comments about today's call or Che Alaska in general. And the phone number is 907-222-7714, or you can email Diana, D-I-A-N-A, at akaction.org. And thanks again to everyone who participated and to our wonderful speakers. We appreciate all that you do. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The moderator has disconnected.